I'm a 29-year-old woman named Leora, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the person who gets forgotten in my own family. I wasn't mistreated. No one yelled at me or called me names. That would have at least meant they were paying attention. Instead, I've always just been invisible. Polite smiles, nods, but never a real place in the room. My older brother Evan is a high-profile lawyer with a spotless image and an even shinier LinkedIn page. He's the kind of person my parents brag about at dinner parties, firm handshake, classic suits, the works. Then there's Myriel, my younger sister. She started a blog during college that blew up. Now she's a full-on lifestyle influencer, home renovation reels, skincare routines, collabs with mid-tier fashion brands. She lives in neutrals and beige, and my parents treat her like a walking PR opportunity. Me? I work in private security, specifically in cybersecurity. Most of my contracts are under NDA. I deal with breaches, stalkers, blackmail, insider threats. It's quiet work, low profile by design. I like it that way. The problem is my family never bothered to learn what I actually do. They know I do something with computers, and that's about it. They've never asked. At every gathering, it was like I wasn't even there. I'd show up, bring something, help clean up, and no one would even notice when I slipped out early. Photos? I was always the one taking them. Group chats? My name would be left out, and if I asked about it, someone would say, "Oh, we thought you were busy." Birthday gifts came labeled Leora and guest, as if the idea of me coming alone was too awkward to acknowledge. I stopped fighting it. I became the ghost at every table. A year ago, I started therapy. I'd gotten so good at disappearing, I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. My therapist helped me trace things back, how being overlooked shaped how I saw myself, how I avoided connection before people could forget me. I made changes, slowly. I stepped back from my family for a while. I didn't attend the last 2 holiday gatherings, skipped a few birthdays. No one called to check in. Then, something happened that should have mattered. I got a national award in my field. One of the top infrastructure firms in the country had been under a quiet, targeted cyber attack. I'd been contracted to investigate it, and I traced it back to a group that had been probing multiple systems at once. I stopped the breach before it got worse, and the firm went public about it. The article ran in local news. A few coworkers reached out. No one in my family said a word. I know they saw it. Mariel's manager actually liked the article on LinkedIn. After that, I let go of trying. I went back to work, kept my circle small, until a wedding invitation showed up. My cousin Isolde was getting married. A big, elegant wedding at a vineyard 3 hours out of town. I almost threw it away, but something about it caught me. It was the first family-wide event I'd been invited to in months. They'd sent it to my actual address, with my name correctly printed. No guest, just me. I stared at that envelope for days. It felt like a test. Not of them, of me. I could go and fade into the wallpaper like I always had, or I could do something else. Something that made sure they'd never forget I was there. That's when I made the call. One of my long-term clients, someone I'd worked with for over 2 years, had become a close friend. He's a known figure in political and cybersecurity circles, someone who's occasionally in the news during high-profile negotiations or international panels. I won't name him here, but let's just say a few people at the wedding would have recognized him immediately. The kind of person who doesn't go anywhere unnoticed. I asked him for a favor, not to make a scene, not to draw attention, just to come with me, as a friend, as backup. He agreed without hesitation. He even arranged for our transport. No flashing lights, no motorcade. Just clean, quiet precision. That's what we both do best. The day of the wedding, I wore a deep green dress with a structured jacket. Hair pulled back, minimal jewelry, simple, but unmistakably deliberate. He met me at my place, shook my hand, and said, "Let's make it memorable." We pulled into the venue right on time. The parking lot was already full. I stepped out of the car, and for once, I didn't feel the need to hang back. I walked beside him, arm in arm, straight through the entrance. We didn't even get past the foyer before I noticed heads turning. My aunt paused mid-sentence. Mariela blinked twice and stiffened, clearly surprised. Evan stood up straighter. No one said a word. That was the first moment in my life where I knew, without anyone having to say it, that they finally saw me. And I hadn't even made it to the reception yet. As soon as Jocks and I stepped into the venue, everything shifted. The chatter didn't stop, but it changed. Words dropped mid-sentence. Heads turned. A few people paused with half-lifted champagne glasses. I didn't break stride. Neither did Jocks. He nodded at a waiter who instinctively stepped aside, and we walked straight through the entrance like we belonged there, which, for once, we absolutely did. The reaction was instant. Mariel stood frozen near the welcome table, holding her phone at an angle like she'd been about to film something. Her expression dropped so quickly it looked like someone had unplugged her. Our Uncle Eldrick nearly spilled his drink, doing a double take. And I hadn't even spoken yet. Jocks greeted a few people near the entrance with polite nods. A woman I vaguely remembered from a cousin's graduation leaned over to whisper in someone else's ear, eyes locked on us. One of the groomsmen stared like he was trying to place Jocks from a headline. Then, the unexpected began. People actually approached me, not Jocks me. They came up with wide eyes, nervous grins, asking how I knew him. One of my father's friends leaned in close and asked if Jock was my partner. Another assumed I must be working security for him and asked if I'd switched careers. I didn't correct anyone. I just smiled and thanked them for coming to say hello. Let them guess. Mariel made her way over before I even reached the main hall. She gave me a quick hug, more of a shoulder press, and looked Jocks up and down like she didn't believe he was real. She tried to act unfazed, but her hand clenched around her clutch just a little too tight. The usual backhanded compliments didn't come. For the first time in my life, she didn't look like she had the upper hand. Then came Evan. He usually barely speaks to me at these things. When he does, it's surface-level questions about how's tech stuff, or still doing your computer work. But this time he walked over with his wife and actually introduced me, like I was someone interesting. He called me his sister, who works in international cyber investigations. That's not exactly what I do, but again, I didn't correct him. The biggest surprise? The bride. Isolde had always treated me like distant background noise, friendly enough, but we never had one-on-one talks. Yet here she was, pulling me aside with both hands and insisting I sit at the immediate family table. I glanced around to see if maybe someone had canceled last minute, but no, there was a place card already printed with my name. When it came time for photos, I was expecting to be asked to take them, like usual, but the photographer actually waved me into the shot. Mariel gave a tight smile and tried to steer the photographer's attention, but Jock stood calmly beside me, smiling like this was all completely normal. More photos followed, family groups, cousins, even a few fun shots where I ended up in the middle, not on the edge, not half out of frame. Right in the center, Mariel kept hovering. Every conversation I got pulled into, she somehow found a way to drift over and insert herself. I was talking with my cousin Lana and her husband about recent cybersecurity risks with smart homes when Mariel suddenly popped in to share a story about a brand sponsorship she did with a smart lock company. Jax kept handling it beautifully, asking Lana questions, redirecting attention, sliding compliments my way that sounded effortless. He mentioned the award I got without sounding like he was bragging for me. People leaned in when he spoke. Then they looked back at me differently. The toast came next. I didn't expect anything special. But then Isolde, glass raised, voice steady, thanked the people who helped make her wedding day stress-free. She mentioned her planner, her hairstylist, and then paused. And then she thanked me by name for advising her when she had security concerns at the venue 2 weeks ago. It was something I'd done in a 5-minute phone call, but the way she said it made it sound like I'd saved the whole event. A few heads turned again. Evan actually nodded at me. Mariel blinked hard. Later, my aunt, one I hadn't spoken to in maybe 4 years, approached me. She's a small-scale publisher mostly known for cozy fiction. She said she'd had no idea what kind of work I did, and asked if I'd ever considered writing a book. Not a novel, but something about my field, memoir or educational, maybe even consulting with authors. I told her I'd think about it. Again, I didn't get too specific. Let them wonder. Through it all, I didn't gloat. I smiled, answered questions, stayed calm. Jax made sure I was never stuck in a dead-end conversation, never cornered. He even excused us once to get air when someone started asking me questions that felt too close to classified projects. By the end of the night, my phone had more notifications than I'd seen in years. Messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in forever. Some were compliments. Some were awkward check-ins. One cousin apologized for not staying in touch. Another said they were proud of me and asked if I had time for coffee next week. I didn't reply to most of them. Not out of spite. I just wanted to sleep. The next morning, Mariel posted a story on Instagram. It was a blurry video of the wedding hall with text layered over it. Some people can't stand not being the center of attention, even on someone else's big day. 2 days after the wedding, my phone buzzed with a notification I hadn't seen before. I'd been added to a group chat titled Family Updates. The participants list was long: siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, even a couple of the younger kids who didn't text much but occasionally dropped in emojis. It was the first time I'd been looped into a full family conversation. I hadn't even known the chat existed. The first few messages after I joined were polite. A welcome from the bride, a photo dump from the wedding, someone's blurry shot of the dessert table. Then came a short message from Evan, good to finally have Leora in here. A few thumbs up followed. I sent a quick thanks and kept scrolling. It didn't take long before Mariel made her entrance. She posted a meme. It was an old stock photo of someone holding an umbrella for a celebrity while people ignored the assistant. The caption read, "When you bring a powerful +1 but forget you're still a nobody." The timing wasn't subtle. Some cousins responded with laughing emojis. Others stayed silent. Then Lana, the cousin I'd spoken to about smart homes, replied with, "Pretty sure that nobody helped Isolde to make sure her wedding didn't turn into a data breach." A few heart reactions popped up under that. Another cousin added, "Imagine being this bitter after your own wedding." The chat got awkward. Mariel didn't reply. 5 minutes later, she left the group. I started getting private messages almost immediately. One from the aunt who'd asked about my field. "I'm sorry about that. She's been tense since the wedding." Another from my cousin Grant, "Honestly, you were the most interesting person there." Even Evan messaged me. He admitted he hadn't realized how intentional I'd been about my privacy until the weekend. He thought I was just reserved. That was the word he used, reserved. 2 more days passed before the next thing hit. Mariel released a podcast episode titled Influencers, Boundaries, and the Performance of Power. I don't usually listen to her content, but someone forwarded me the link. 10 minutes in, she made a vague reference to certain people leveraging public connections to feel important in rooms they've never belonged in. She added something about familial leeches and fame adjacents who mistake proximity for relevance. Jax heard about it through one of his former colleagues. He called me while I was leaving work and offered to post something publicly, just a casual note about how long we'd known each other and how integral I'd been to several of his recent projects. He said he could highlight my discretion and technical expertise without getting too specific. I thanked him but told him not to. We both agreed it wasn't worth escalating. Silence, in this case, made more noise. That weekend, the bride's family hosted a post-wedding dinner. This wasn't a formal event, just a low-key backyard gathering with catered food and string lights. I hadn't planned on going, but Isolde's mother personally messaged me to say she hoped I'd attend. I went. People were different this time. There wasn't any of the usual small talk. They wanted opinions, real ones. One uncle asked what I thought about recent government surveillance laws. An older cousin asked about VPNs. Even the grandfather, who usually only talked about weather and golf, asked if my field intersected with international crime. I answered only what I was comfortable sharing. No specifics, no classified details. But I didn't deflect either. Jax once told me that controlled transparency is more powerful than silence. I used that approach all night. Mariel showed up late. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses even though it was evening. When she greeted me, she tried a different angle, complaining about the pressures of being watched online. She hinted that she understood what it was like to feel picked apart. I nodded and changed the subject. She tried twice more. I stayed polite but didn't engage. Toward the end of the dinner, Isolde's planner approached me about something unexpected. Mariel had given her my contact info and asked if I'd consider consulting on an influencer retreat she was planning in the spring. Apparently, Mariel had told her I was great with safety logistics, likely trying to spin our strained connection into something she could package professionally. I gave a non-committal answer, said I'd have to check my availability. Later that evening, Evan pulled me aside. He didn't waste time. He told me he used to think I was just someone who didn't try, that I was passive, invisible by choice. He admitted he didn't understand that privacy could be power, that staying quiet didn't mean you didn't know what was going on. He called me strategic. I didn't argue. After that dinner, I made some decisions. I stopped letting conversations drag past my comfort zone. If someone asked a favor and I didn't want to do it, I said no. If someone brought up family drama, I stepped away. I no longer let myself be used as the neutral ground between siblings, cousins, or whatever old tensions were simmering. I didn't owe anyone explanations. Meanwhile, word about the wedding had made its way into circles I hadn't expected. My firm's communications director reached out to let me know I'd been submitted as a potential speaker for an upcoming cybersecurity summit in New York. They wanted someone who could talk about public-private risk management. The media exposure from the award and some of the photos that ended up in the local press had gotten their attention. In my next therapy session, I walked through everything that had happened: wedding podcast, group chat, dinner, the retreat offer, the summit invite. My therapist called it a shift from invisibility to selective presence. She said most people chase being seen by everyone. I was learning to be seen only by those who mattered. A few nights later, I got a text from Mariel. We should talk before things go too far. That was the whole message. No context. No follow-up. I haven't replied. Still deciding if I will. Mariel invited me to brunch. Just the two of us. That hadn't happened since we were teenagers. The message came through with one of those over-friendly tones that didn't match anything she'd said or done lately. She suggested a trendy rooftop cafe downtown, one of her regular spots that gets tagged in every influencer's photo dump. I showed up on time. She arrived 15 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses, a camel trench coat, and designer sneakers that looked like they'd never touched actual pavement. The hostess walked us to a table near the edge of the rooftop, where the skyline was fully visible. I ordered a coffee. She got an oat milk latte with vanilla syrup and started the conversation with comments about the weather and the views. It was all surface talk. Brunch filler. Mariel spoke with a rhythm that felt practiced, like she'd run through this conversation in her head before arriving. She complimented my dress, called it so clean and minimalist, then pivoted to how she envied my ability to stay off-grid. Followed it up with, it must be so peaceful not being in the spotlight all the time. She kept her voice light, like it was a joke. It wasn't. Eventually, the real reason she'd asked to meet came out. She leaned in, lowered her sunglasses slightly, and said some of her sponsors had been reaching out with questions about Jocks, about how we knew each other, about whether he was part of her network now. She tried to frame it as casual curiosity, but she was clearly irritated. She said she wanted to shoot a short vlog segment, just something simple, maybe us grabbing coffee with Jocks, so she could use it to balance the narrative that had formed after the wedding. I told her no, calmly. No theatrics. Just a clear boundary. I said I didn't want my work, or the people I worked with, tied to influencer content. I said Jocks wasn't a prop. She called my response selfish. She said I was hoarding connections and accused me of using him to create drama at the wedding. I reminded her I hadn't chosen the seat at the head table. Isolde's parents did. Mariel wasn't finished. She leaned back, tilted her cup, and said she could always share her version of how things unfolded if I wasn't open to collaboration. She smiled while saying it like it was just a passing comment, not a threat, but it landed like one. I didn't argue. I stood up, placed a 20 on the table for my coffee, and walked out. No parting shot. No dramatics. Just done. Later that night, Jocks texted me. Someone claiming to be my sister had contacted his office asking for a potential content partnership. The inquiry had come through the general communications form, but the wording was clear. Morale wanted a brand-friendly joint appearance, preferably with a casual backdrop and light security themes. Jocks asked me if I wanted him to respond directly or pass it to his communications advisor. I told him to have his team reply, firm but professional. No warmth. No interest in future opportunities. The next morning, the family group chat flared up again. Mariel posted a message that said, "Jealousy is loud when someone's silence is mistaken for weakness." No one responded for a while. Then someone posted a gif of a popcorn bucket. Another cousin followed with, "Maybe try saying what you mean next time." No one backed Mariel publicly this time. That night, a message came in from Vesper, one of our younger cousins. We were never close. She'd always seemed withdrawn at family events, usually sitting with headphones in or off to the side. She thanked me for waking everyone up, said she'd felt sidelined for years but never had the courage to speak up. She told me watching me take up space made her rethink how she let people treat her. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just thanked her. At my next therapy appointment, I walked through everything. The brunch, the veiled threat, the sponsorship pitch, and how quickly Mariel had shifted from defensive to opportunistic. My therapist observed that Morale was treating me like an unknown quantity. The version of me she'd always defined, the quiet sister, the background figure, was gone. She didn't know where to place me now, and it was throwing off the balance she'd built her self-image around. That afternoon, I got an email from a government contact. It wasn't from Jocks, but someone I'd met through a different high-profile case last year. The message had the official seal and a multi-paragraph introduction. I'd been invited to join a private security panel in Geneva, part of an international delegation Jocks was attending. It wasn't a keynote. It wasn't flashy. But it was strategic. It would put me in front of diplomats, global tech leaders, and cybersecurity architects from over a dozen countries. I reread the invite 3 times. Attached was a personal note from Jacques, only accept if you want to. You don't owe anyone visibility. I haven't responded yet. I will. But first, I'm checking who else is listed on the panel, because if I do show up in Geneva, it won't be as someone's +1. Not anymore. I accepted the Geneva panel. The official itinerary arrived 2 days after I confirmed. Travel was fully covered, accommodations arranged, and a background clearance process kicked off immediately. It wasn't the first time I'd undergone personal vetting, but this was the most thorough one yet. I had to submit documents, pass contracts, and references. Jacques' office coordinated the security details and sent over briefing materials for the panel discussion. I found out then it wouldn't just be a closed-door roundtable, it would also be live-streamed. A separate recording would go up on a European government archive. My name, face, and voice would be attached to a public record of global cyber policy. A week before the flight, a European tech blog ran a preview article of the panelists. They included a headshot Jacques' assistant had requested from me and listed me as a name to watch in cybersecurity defense. The piece was straightforward, but it got picked up by a few industry aggregators and one academic newsletter. The coverage wasn't huge, but it was public. The article somehow made it into the family group chat. I wasn't the one who shared it. When I checked my phone that afternoon, I had 4 missed calls. One was from my father. He hasn't called me directly in almost a year. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and this time I picked up. He told me he'd seen the article, and that he was so proud and knew I'd always do something important. I let him talk for a bit before asking what prompted it. He paused, then admitted Myril had shown him the article. Over the next few days, my parents called more than they had in the last 6 months combined. But the calls weren't about me. They were about Jacques, about whether I'd be on television, if they could stream the panel, if I was giving a speech. When I told them it was more of a discussion format and not a performance, they still asked if there'd be cameras. Evan messaged me 2 days before the trip. He said his law firm was launching a tech division and asked if I'd be open to advising. He said my name carried weight now and he respected my judgment. It was the most professional message I'd ever received from him. I told him I'd consider it, depending on scope. I didn't commit to anything. When I landed in Geneva, I was picked up by a local delegate driver and escorted to a secure hotel. The lobby was filled with other speakers, diplomats, and security analysts. Each badge was color-coded by role. Mine had the panelist designation in silver. I checked in, received my media packet, and was told to attend a press prep the next morning. On the second night, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Myril. She started the conversation by congratulating me on the panel. Then she said she'd just been contacted about hosting a streamed interview series called Women in Global Innovation. The offer, she said, had come from a media firm that had covered the Geneva summit before. She implied her involvement was probably thanks to proximity, and paused long enough for me to respond. I didn't. I let the silence stretch. Then I told her, "You're welcome to succeed. Just don't step on me to do it." I ended the call without waiting for a reply. The next morning, the panel aired. I sat between a British digital intelligence officer and a delegate from Singapore's Cyber Defense Ministry. Each of us had 8 minutes to speak, followed by moderated questions. I focused on threats to critical infrastructure systems, specifically cross-border vulnerabilities in energy and transit networks. I referenced anonymized case studies and used language cleared by my firm. The clip of my segment was uploaded to a European policy account and then reshared by a major tech page. Within 24 hours, it had been clipped into smaller edits on social media. I received follow-ups from 3 different cybersecurity institutes, 2 university research teams, and 1 North American defense contractor. They asked about collaborations, mentorships, and possible consulting engagements. None of them mentioned Jacques. They mentioned me. That evening, Myril posted an Instagram story. It featured a photo of the panelists, myself included, with the caption, "Brilliant and brave. My sister is the real deal." Some followers called it growth. Others commented things like, "Didn't you shade her last month?" or "Too late for the Proud Sister Act." Myril turned off comments a few hours later. I didn't respond publicly. On my flight back, I kept my phone off until I reached the airport terminal. While waiting at baggage claim, someone tapped my shoulder. It was a man I hadn't seen in almost 9 years. He used to run internal security at a mid-sized tech firm where I'd interned during college. He said he'd seen the Geneva clip and had a question. His company had just received government funding to launch a new cybersecurity division, public-facing, high visibility, leadership level. He wanted to know if I was interested in stepping into a role that would put me in the spotlight permanently. I gave him my email, said I'd look over the details. No decisions yet. But this time I'd be walking into the room, not as a guest, not as a +1, just as myself. And all eyes would already be there. 2 days after I got back from Geneva, my parents invited me to a dinner at their house. Then she and cocktail not just dinner though, it was worded as a welcome back celebration. The message included a small graphic flyer which was odd on its own. It read, "Honoring Leora, our global star." I didn't ask for it. I didn't confirm I'd be there. But the time and date were already set, and other relatives had clearly been looped in. I decided to show up, mostly to see what this really was. The front yard was lit up with outdoor lanterns. The driveway was full, cars parked tight, and a folding table set up near the porch with printed name cards for each guest. When I walked in, Myril was already there, seated in the living room in a perfectly coordinated 2-tone jumpsuit. Evan stood near the kitchen, talking to a small cluster of extended family. My mother clapped lightly when she saw me. My father reached for a hug and steered me toward the dining room like I was walking down an aisle. The head of the table, my father's usual spot, was empty. A name card with mine on it sat in front of the largest chair. Myril was placed to my right, Evan directly across. Everyone else was spread out along the sides. I sat, took a sip of water, and waited. Dinner started with my mother raising her glass. She made a short speech about how proud they were and called me the family's newest beacon of excellence. She used that word, beacon, 3 times. Then came the part where she slipped in phrases like thanks to the values she was raised with, and proof that quiet roots can still grow the strongest trees. She kept looking at everyone else while she spoke, like the speech wasn't for me at all. Evan spoke next. He talked about how I was always smart, even as a child. He said he used to joke that I'd be the one to retire early and buy everyone vacation homes. He laughed. No one else did. Muriel stayed silent during that round, looking at her phone between bites of salad. The tone shifted halfway through the meal. That's when my father cleared his throat and asked for just a minute to explain something. He said the family had been quietly exploring the idea of a nonprofit, something to uplift innovation and support young thinkers. Now that my name was gaining recognition, they wanted to center the initiative around me. They envisioned me as the inspiration and public face. I asked who was running it. My father said the executive roles would be split between Evan and Muriel. He said they had experience with public communication and legal structure. I asked when this idea had been discussed. They said it was in early planning, but that the announcement could be drafted within the month. They'd already reserved a domain name. I asked why no one had talked to me about this before building the plan. There was silence. Muriel finally spoke and said, "You always said you wanted to matter. This is your chance to do it with the family behind you." I stood up. No raised voice. No dramatic monologue. Just stood, picked up my phone, and excused myself. I said I didn't come back from Geneva to be a mascot. I walked out through the back door. On the way to my car, I heard footsteps. It was Isolde, the cousin who got married. She didn't say much, just looked me in the eye and said, "You're not wrong to walk away." That night, I got a message from her. She sent me a screenshot from a group chat titled Brand Revival. The members were my parents, Evan, Muriel, and a few names I didn't recognize, probably friends or marketing contacts. The chat had messages like she doesn't need to do anything, just let us use the Geneva pictures, and her name will make the whole thing credible from launch. There was a mock-up of a press release with my photo at the top, and a placeholder quote beneath it, something I never said. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer who specializes in intellectual property and likeness rights. I explained the situation, showed them the chat screenshot, the graphic flyer, and mentioned the nonprofit structure being discussed. The lawyer was calm and clear. They had no right to use my name, photo, or achievements to promote anything without explicit written consent, especially not in filings, website bios, or marketing drafts. That afternoon, I drafted an email. I kept it simple. I told them I had been made aware of conversations and materials that included my name and image without my permission. I made it clear they were not authorized to use me in connection with any public or private venture, not for press, not for social media, not for branding. I asked for confirmation in writing that they would respect this boundary. No replies so far, just read receipts. I'm not waiting for them to answer. I've already blocked their access, literally and legally. It's strange how long I carried the idea that once I made it, things would shift, that maybe my family would look at me and see the same value they assigned to Evan's courtroom wins or Muriel's online partnerships. I thought success might work like a key, that if I unlocked the right door, they'd meet me where I stood. But I've learned that if someone only changes when they see a benefit, that's not change. It's manipulation. And I'm done building bridges toward people who only show up when there's a spotlight. A week after I sent the legal notice and stepped away from their nonprofit plans, Muriel dropped a new podcast episode. The title was When Family Success Divides More Than It Unites. It was vague, full of abstract language, but her tone had the kind of polished bitterness that doesn't need names. Anyone who knew the story could connect the dots. She talked about growing up in the shadow of people who pretended to be private out of modesty, but were actually calculating. She mentioned sisters, who think silence makes them superior and how some people only emerge when there's applause. The comments section told the rest of the story. Some fans took her side. Others didn't hold back. One said, "This sounds like jealousy in real time." Another wrote, "This is what happens when you treat your sister like scenery and forget she's her own story." By the next day, I noticed that some of her older videos had been quietly deleted. Ones where she'd referred to herself as the first in the family to break into real media. Her bio shifted too. Less trailblazer, more creative collaborator. The public pivot was obvious. Meanwhile, my father called again. He didn't push this time, just said the foundation idea was on hold for now. Then he tried to slide into a narrative about how he'd always encouraged my focus, how he was the one who told me to pursue something strong and stable. I thanked him for checking in, but didn't give him anything to build on. I'd heard that tone before. It wasn't support. It was positioning. I brought it up during therapy. My therapist called it relief, not resentment. She said I wasn't pushing for a seat at their table anymore because I'd stopped believing the table was where I needed to be. I wasn't angry. I was just done trying to belong in places where I was only ever a utility. That same week, Jacques invited me to a leadership retreat in Provence. It would be small, private discussions and workshops with about 20 professionals across international policy, tech ethics, and digital privacy. He asked if I'd be willing to co-host a segment on ethical boundaries and high-visibility roles. I said yes. A few days after the retreat was announced, Jacques' assistant reached out. Someone applied under a vague alias, but the contact details included Muriel's media agency email, subtle enough to pass casual scrutiny, but not past Jacques' team. She had filled out the application form and even linked a proposal to bridge influencer visibility with tech advocacy. No prior invitation. No message to me. Just an application using a vague alias that couldn't hide the branding tone. I asked Jacques' team to decline it without explanation. Just a polite no. They honored it immediately. That same evening, I opened the family updates group chat one last time. No messages had come in since the podcast drop. I typed one short line, "Please don't involve me in things that serve a version of me you've made up." Then I left the chat. Later that night, Isolde messaged me. She said she left the chat too. A few others did as well. She said they were talking about starting something of their own, something real, off camera, without any branding motive. She said they were tired of pretending everything was a campaign. The following week, a respected industry magazine ran a feature titled The Quiet Force Changing Cyber Leadership. I'd been interviewed briefly during the Geneva panel and gave consent for the profile. I'd asked for no mention of family. They honored that. A few days later, someone I worked with early in my career, back when I was just an intern helping triage low-level phishing scams, reached out. They now ran a nonprofit focused on digital literacy and privacy education. They had asked if I'd co-develop a curriculum for public use. The mission was strong, and the people were genuine. But they were also connected to the same influencer circles Mariel drifted in and out of. I declined. Politely. I said I was focusing elsewhere. When I arrived in Provence, the retreat was quiet and stunning. No staged photos. No live streams. Just long tables under trees, shared meals, and real conversation. One night, we opened a few bottles of wine in the garden. I laughed until my face hurt. I hadn't thought about group chats, podcast rants, or press releases in days. Weeks later, I received a long email from my mother. It wasn't an apology. It was a mix of memories and guilt. She asked me to come back into the fold, to not let outside things divide us. I didn't respond for 3 days. When I did, I kept it short. I wish you well, but I won't be folding myself smaller just to fit again. That same afternoon, I deleted the shared family calendar from my phone, the one that reminded me of birthdays I was never invited to celebrate, dinners I was expected to attend but never acknowledged at. I didn't burn the bridge. They just watched while I built my own, one brick at a time. Oh,